Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining me for our Fridays at 9. Obviously, it's 9:30, so I'm going to get right into our content today. On my way here, 495 was completely shut down on both ways, so it took over an hour to get here, and normally it's a 10-minute ride for me. So wanted to talk today about persuasion. Last week we talked about persuasion and the psychology of influencing people to do what you want them to do. Well, Robert Cialdini, who wrote the book that we talked about last week, Influence, he 20 years later wrote a second book called Persuasion. And basically the idea of this book is that there's certain things you can do in advance of trying to persuade somebody to get them to do what you would like them to do. If you're in sales, if you're in life, I mean, we all day long are trying to get people to do what we would like them to do, whether it's our children, our customers. So last week we talked about how to persuade people. Today we're going to talk about how to persuade them, how to get people receptive to whatever you have to say, because if we can get people receptive to our message, it's so much easier to then persuade them to do what we are looking for them to do. So we're going to talk about the psychology of persuasion. So persuasion is the process of arranging for recipients to be receptive to a message before they encounter it. So this could be a 3-hour program. I'm going to condense this into super bite-sized chunks for our 25-minute program today. To persuade somebody optimally, it's necessary to persuade them optimally. So if you want to persuade somebody to do something, you got to get them ready first. What we present first changes the way people experience what we present next. So if we want to get somebody or persuade them to do what we would like them to do, we need to get them ready. We need to get them open to hearing our message first. So I look at it that when you are getting somebody ready to persuade them to do what you would like them to do, it's kind of like that game of chutes and ladders. Like there's certain things that you might say during a listing presentation that will aim you down or up the ladder to get the listing appointment. As well, there are things that you might say at a listing appointment that shoot you right down the chute so that you're not going to get the listing presentation. You're not going to get the listing from the person. So when you are crafting the conversations you have with buyers and sellers, it's important to understand that there's certain things you can do beforehand to get people receptive to your message. So first thing that I wanted to talk about is that if you want to get somebody into a position to accept your message so that you can persuade them, first you have to build trust with them. Kind of something we all knew anyways, that if somebody trusts you, they're going to more likely list with you. If somebody trusts you, they're more likely going to buy from you. But think of this even when it comes to your Zillow leads. Like, what are the things that you're doing when that call comes in? Somebody has zero trust in you because they don't even know who you are. Some of these calls, like they don't even know why they're on the phone with you. And you're not going to get that person in a position that you can persuade them unless you can first take some steps so that that person is ready to be influenced by you. You got to build some trust. So there was a great story in The Psychology of Persuasion, Robert Cialdini's second book. And it was about this. It was a company that sold fire alarms and or alarm systems in people's houses. And there was one sales guy at this company who outsold every other fire alarm salesman that they had. And they're like, what is this guy doing that is so different than what all of our other salespeople are doing? So they decided to send somebody out to study him, to go on all of his appointments with him so they could figure out, like, what is this guy doing? Let's get all the other people to do it. So they sent somebody out to study this guy, and what they noticed is every time he would get into somebody's house to do a presentation about why they needed an alarm system, he would, in the middle of the conversation, be like, oh, I forgot something in the car. There's a pamphlet that I really need to show you. I forgot it in the car. Here, you guys review this. You sit here and review this. I'm going to run out to my vehicle. I'll be back in 2 minutes. I'll let myself back in. And what they realized is that by that small act, which, by the way, he did on every presentation, didn't seem like anything. In fact, it seemed like he was like this forgetful guy who forgot something out in his car. But what he was doing is that each time the customers were sitting on their couch or at their kitchen table, and they were letting this guy walk out of the house and walk back in without having to ring the doorbell. And so the psychology of that is that these people were already instilling trust in him. To let somebody just walk into your house without ringing a doorbell, you're already getting that person to instill trust even if they don't realize it. So what are the things you can do to get somebody to begin to trust you? Because as soon as you can get somebody to begin to trust you, now you're getting them ready so that you can persuade them down the road. And again, it's on our listing appointments, our buyer appointments. It is on those Zillow calls. That's one of the reasons I say to people, like, one of the reasons taking that Zillow call right away or getting back to them right away is so important is because you're starting to build some trust. Like, oh, if I need something from this person, they're going to get back to me right away. By the way, it's also so important in our business. Like, if you say you're going to call somebody at a particular time, call them at that time or do it beforehand, because those are like planting seeds of trust to get them ready to be at a point that you can influence them. Number 2, privileged moments. So I talked last week about the power of reciprocity. One of the ways to get people to do what you want them to do is that we live in a culture where if somebody does something for you, we feel like we have to pay them back. If somebody does a favor for you, they feel like they owe you. If somebody gives you a gift, you feel like you owe them. So one of the ways to build, to persuade somebody to do something is to do something for them and create a dynamic where they feel like they have to reciprocate. So how this plays into persuasion is that you have to understand that the law of reciprocity does not last forever. So when it comes to persuasion, you have to know that there are privileged moments in a relationship. And what I mean by this, I have had several examples where I realized that if I had asked for something sooner, I could have gotten what I wanted. But because I let so much time lapse from the time I did something for somebody, that by the time I go to ask for what I want, that I've lost the privileged moment. A good way to look at this. So many of you guys know I've done interviews for the last 10 years. I've interviewed 400 plus really cool people. And oftentimes when you go interview somebody, like that person wants to reciprocate. This is why the whole interview thing works, is because when you go out and reach out to a business owner and say, I want to interview you about your business and I'm going to publicize it on my blog and on Facebook, they love you. Like, you just help them in their business, and their business is their baby. So if you then ask for something in return fairly quickly, they're going to do it. But if you wait 2 years and say, hey, by the way, I was the one that interviewed you 2 years ago, you know what, you've lost the privileged moment. So all I want you to take from this is that there is a law of reciprocity. We live in a culture that, like, if you bring a gift, like a small plant to your listing presentation, that person feels like they have to reciprocate and do something for you. But if you do something for somebody and you wait too long, you can lose the privileged moment. The cool thing is that it's so easy to create those privileged moments, to create that reciprocity at any time. Number 3, focused attention. When attention is paid to something, the price is attention is lost to something else. The human mind can only hold one thing in conscious awareness at a time. The toll is a momentary loss of focused attention to everything else. So it's interesting. In the book, they talk about how they polled people about human interest and like how important do people think that a certain event. So let's just say there was an event in like a bad event, maybe a forest fire or something that happened within a community. And then they poll people in that community about how important that event was on the economy or their lives or things like that. The scale in which people felt it was more important to them was directly related to the amount of news coverage for that thing. So you could take something that was really horrible that happened and there was zero news coverage around it, and then you take something that was less horrible, it wasn't that bad, but it got a ton of news coverage. The general consensus when people were interviewed is that this one over here was way more important to like the well-being of people in their community. All it showed is that humans concentrate on whatever there is a light. If there's a light shining on something, that's what they believe is most important. How does this play into like a listing presentation or a buyer presentation? Is I always tell agents, if you don't have a killer listing presentation or a killer buyer presentation that you're showing to customers, like a PowerPoint presentation about what matters when it comes to selecting a real estate agent, then your customer is going to choose a real estate agent on something arbitrary. They don't know what matters because you're not shining a light. Whereas if you go and you show up to your buyer presentation, before you show them a house, you sit with them for 10 minutes and say, hey, I'm going to show you what matters when it comes to selecting a real estate agent. I'm going to show you what matters when it comes to selecting a house. Now you've just shined a light on what matters, and that is going to stick in their head. So another example of this, I don't know, 3 years ago, I had an agent who was one of the most philanthropic agents I had ever met. Super, like, gives so much to charity and sits on all these boards. And she came to me and she's like, you're never going to believe it. I lost a listing. And the reason I lost the listing, when I talked to the customer, I said, why did you choose that other person? And the reason they chose the other real estate agent is because that real estate agent gives $50 on each closing back to a charity. So, of course, my super crazy, unbelievably philanthropic agent is like, do you have any idea? Like, I give way more than $50 on each transaction. I, like, dedicate 10 hours a week to sitting on these boards. I give a chunk of every commission back. I volunteer my time. I do these walks. I spend most of my life doing charity stuff. I said, that's awesome. Did you talk about it in your listing presentation? They said, no, I do it because I love it. And I said, well, unfortunately, because you didn't talk about it, you lost a listing over it because that other person shined a light on their charity work, which was $50 per closing. You didn't shine a light, so to the consumer, it wasn't important to you. So you got to have a killer presentation where you tell people what that should matter to them. Okay, what else gets people into a position that they're ready to listen to you? The next one is threats to safety. What motivates people more than like winning? What motivates people more is a fear of loss. So somehow, if you could put that into your listing and buyer presentations, you're going to get people receptive to hearing your message. So if you look at our How to Hire a Lion listing and buyer presentation, I have a slide in there. And it talks about these are all the things that can go wrong if you do not hire the right real estate agent. So Mr. and Mrs. Buyer or Seller, what could happen if you don't hire the right real estate agent? Your property could sit on the market while the value decreases over the next 6 months. Or you could get an awesome negotiator on the other side of the transaction. If you get an awesome negotiator and you don't have one on your side, you're in trouble. A real estate firm with an ulterior motive could be working for you. In other words, you could end up with a real estate agent who could care less if you actually achieve your goal. Or you could end up with massive legal issues. Fear motivates people. You have to put something in your listing and buyer presentation that says, hey, if you don't do this right, Mr. and Mrs. Buyer or Seller, this is what you stand to lose. Because that is what people's ears perk up, and that is when they are now ready to listen. I want to hear what you have to say, because I don't want a threat to my safety. I don't want to be in a legal issue, etc. What they also found in this study, which the book was based on, how to persuade people, is that people love mysteries. So if you can hold somebody's attention for a while, they are listening to you. And if they're listening to you, you're building trust with them. And if you have trust with them, they are more likely to be influenced by you. So they said if you want to get somebody's attention and hold it, create a mystery. There's a bunch of ways that you could do this in for example, a listing presentation. So think about this. You might have better luck. So many agents show up to a listing presentation, do their presentation, and then they say, here's the CMA, this is what your house is worth. What if you didn't give them the value, right? Instead, you have a printout of all the comps, and you say, okay, together, let's go through all these comps and solve this mystery together. So this house directly next door sold for $350,000. And that house had all these benefits and features. Now, if we compare that to your property, where does that bring you in line? So in other words, create a mystery and get them involved in helping you solve it. Now you're getting them into a position that they're listening to you. Counter arguments. One of the best ways to enhance audience acceptance of one's message is to reduce the availability of strong counter arguments to it. The counter argument is typically more powerful than the original argument. How does this play into a presentation, a listing or buyer presentation? One of the ways that this plays in is, I always say, if you have a killer presentation, you should have no objections. So going into a listing and buyer appointment, you know the common objections. If you're always up against Redfin, then right in your presentation, you should be addressing Redfin and the problems, what somebody needs to be concerned about if they are considering working with Redfin. By the way, we have some great videos on Redfin for consumers, both one on what consumers who want to list with Redfin want to know, and also one for buyers who are considering going unrepresented in purchasing a home. But the point is, there is no objection if you take it out. So as part of your presentation, know what the counter arguments are going to be from the other side and address those and say, well, I know what you're thinking. I know you're thinking these. Grab the counter argument right from the person and address it. Don't make them have to bring it up. Associations. So photos of people winning increase both the achievement-related thoughts and productivity of individuals exposed to it. So if you are always posting on social media, Facebook, listing presentations, buyer presentations, mailings, photos of people winning, people are going to associate you with people winning. In our business, people winning is somebody that's closing on a home. Other ones at work, they say if in your presentations you have people, pictures of people who are holding a warm cup of coffee, then the person seeing that presentation is going to have warm thoughts towards you. they're going to feel closer and more trusting of you. By the way, this is so interesting. I used to always, both back when I did mortgages, back when I briefly sold real estate, and in recruiting, like when I go to somebody's house, a stranger's house, because I want to present something to them, they would always offer me coffee. And I always felt like I didn't want to be an imposition on people, so I'd always say no to whatever anybody asked for. What I learned after reading this book, Persuasion, is that is a huge mistake. Because if you go into somebody's house and they offer you coffee and you take it, they now associate you as somebody who hangs out in their house with feelings of warmth, like a friend or a buddy. Like you're no longer a salesperson that just came into their house. By the way, bringing a cup of coffee to somebody's house does the same thing. So you could show up to your listing appointment, call ahead and say, hey, how do you take your coffee? I'll bring one along. Because now if you're sitting at their kitchen table having a coffee with them, you're in a different position than somebody who is a salesperson just showing up. The book also talks about implicit egoism. People love to see their name. They will identify with you more if you build their name into a listing presentation. By the way, Coca-Cola's sales went up for the first time in a decade once they started putting people's names on a Coke can. Why? People see their name on a Coke can and they're like, oh my God, my name's Jessica. I got to buy my Coke because it's got my name on it. So use that in your presentations. How long does it take? 5 seconds to update your listing presentation, your PowerPoint or your buyer presentation? Include a quick photo of the people right in your presentation with them holding a sold sign. Super easy. People also easily remember stuff that has a rhyme or a rhythm. So if you could think about that. I always think about like Michael Durkin out in Northborough. When I think Michael, I think keep Durkin working. And that's his email, is keepdurkinworking@gmail.com. It's his tagline. I'd say for customers, when they're like, oh, who is our agent? I don't think they think Mike Durkin. I think they think keep Durkin working. People associate with stuff that rhymes and make it easy to remember. Number 8, togetherness. Create a sense of we-ness to get others invested in your business. So for example, instead of calling people, let's say you're doing your prospecting each day, instead of calling and saying, hey, who do you know that's looking to buy or sell a home? What if instead you called your past client and said, hey, could I have a quick conversation? I would love your advice on something. Now the person's getting invested into you. Like, I'd love your advice on, I'd love to ask your advice on how you think I could best grow my business in this market. I'm looking for other clients just like you. Like, if you could give me some advice on what you think I could do. Because now, like, it's not your problem. It's our problem. Like, we're going to together solve this. So if you can create we-ness in your business, you're in good shape. Localism. Humans have a tendency to favor people who exist in close proximity to them. This is what I want you to know. That I think it's important when you meet customers to dig for some information like, hey, where did you go to school? What town did you grow up in? Find stuff that you have similarities with. And if you have a similarity with them, whatever it is, that you grew up in the same town or you guys have the same alma mater, you're going to get way more or put yourself in a position that you're more likely to influence that person. If you can get people to kind of identify you as family, they're more likely to be influenced by you. So the story they talk about in The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini is that Warren Buffett does this in his annual report to his investors. It talks about us and our family at Berkshire Hathaway. When you identify people as part of your community, then they identify you. People do things for family that they wouldn't do for other people. So if you can get people to identify with you as family, you put yourself in a really good spot to influence them. Final thoughts. Who we are with respect to any choice is where we are attentionally in the moment before the choice. We can be channeled to those privileged moments by cues we haphazardly bump into in our daily settings, or by cues a well-skilled communicator has placed there. In either case, the made moment is persuasive. So the book is Persuasion. It is a revolutionary way to influence and persuade. And it is the same author that we spoke about last week who wrote the book Influence, who is Robert Cialdini. So that's it for this week's program. Thank you for joining me this week, and we will be back next week. Have a great week.